Hi, I'm Sarah Pritchard. I'm the Executive Director of Rosie the Riveter Trust, and we are proud to host Rosie Presents. And this is Surviving and Thriving from Yosemite to Rosie the Riveter, a lesbian park ranger in the National Park Service, with our guest, Elizabeth Tucker, and also her guests, who we'll find out more of later. Rosie Presents is one of the ways we're able to bring talks and discussions, usually virtually, that align with our mission to support the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park and its free program. It is a free program, and we really appreciate your financial support to run this program and other work. Please visit rosietheriveter.org to find out more and to make a donation. Elizabeth Tucker was born in and grew up in San Francisco Bay Area. She graduated from biology at UC Davis in 1990 and was awarded her master's in psychology from John F. Kennedy University in 2020. She lived in New Zealand as a young adult for 4 years, worked in Yosemite National Park for 10 years, lived in a yoga community in the Sierra Foothills for 1 year while working for the Forest Service, and then had the honor of being the third permanent employee hired at Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park in 2003 in Richmond, California, where she worked for the next 18 years. Elizabeth was a founding member of the GALA Yosemite Chapter, the Gay and Lesbian Association of NPS. She marched in the San Francisco Pride Parade in the 90s before the National Park Service allowed park rangers to march in uniform. And to note, I marched in the San Francisco Pride Parade for my first time ever, as Elizabeth invited the trust to join her, along with our retired ranger and dignitary, Betty Reed Soskin, to be part of Grand Marshal Melanie DeMoores and the San Francisco Bay Times contingent. You can see pictures if you follow Rosie the Riveter Trust on Facebook and or Instagram, and there we had a lot of fun. Also, Elizabeth worked with public historian Donna Graves to create the first official LGBTQ exhibit in a National Park Visitor Center at Rosie Park. If you visit, I'm sure that you'll learn something new and appreciate the history that has been gathered. Elizabeth is now a retired park ranger, but is very proud of her 30-year career as a public servant with the National Park Service. I very much appreciate her willingness to continue supporting the parks and helping the trust celebrate the stories of the home front. Thank you. And without further ado, Elizabeth Tucker.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started here. And I'm just really excited to be here. A little bit nervous, but just so pleased and honored and humbled to be asked to do this. I'm also incredibly grateful for my really 30-year connection to the National Park Service and the education I got, the opportunities I got. I'm just humbled and grateful by all my friends and colleagues and all the partners connected to the National Park Service. It truly is an amazing organization and America's best idea. I especially, of course, want to thank the Rosie the Riveter Trust for being there from the beginning. And frankly, without the Rosie the Riveter Trust, the organization that formed even before the Park Service got involved, we might not have some of these structures in Richmond to have a park to tell the story. So, people like Tom Butt and Diane Hedler and Rosemary Corbin and lots of those early board members were really instrumental in helping to save the sites that we used to tell the story. And quick shout out to Marcia Mather-Thrift, the original executive director who worked on the LGBTQ Stories Project with me. And I especially want to thank our current Rosie Trust staff. As you can see, as Sarah mentioned, we were in the Pride Parade literally last Sunday, which is also why I am a little bit tired tonight. So please forgive me if I stumble a little bit. It was an amazing event, and my friend Melanie DeMoore, an incredible singer-songwriter, was a grand marshal, and so we were actually invited to be a part of her contingent because they found out I was connected to Betty Reed Soskin, America's oldest park ranger, as it says on the picture, retired at 100, and so it was an amazing event. I want to thank Lisa Foote for her incredible support of getting this program together and working with me over the last few days, because we do have a lot of moving parts tonight. It'll be kind of exciting. We have some of the other people that contributed to the exhibit and the park are going to be able to come on, and I'm really happy to share them with you, but it's also more work for Lisa and the trust staff. I want to thank Joe behind the scenes to help with that. And then I want to shout out to Molly, who's in the car with Betty Reed Soskin, because she was willing to drive Betty in the parade. That freed me up to take photos and run around and enjoy. So thanks to you all. It's really important work that you're doing. And I want to start off by saying that my pronouns are she, her, and that I live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Bay Miwok, the Muwekma Ohlone, the Northern Valley Yokuts, and other tribes. And the valley in Walnut Creek, California, in which I live, is connected to the Saklan people. All these peoples have loved and cared for these lands since time immemorial. Many of these peoples continue today as thriving members of the diverse communities of the greater San Francisco Bay Area. I do want to mention Park Speak. As a federal employee, I use acronyms, and I'm sure they're going to slip out. So if I say NPS, that means National Park Service. And I am going to shorten the park name because I'm retired. It used to be a thing where we would always have to say the full name, and to acknowledge that is important. It really fills out the full story of the home front, which is so diverse and so nuanced. So when I say Rosie, I'm usually meaning Rosie the Riveter, World War II Homefront National Historical Park. And then when we say the Trust or Rosie Trust, the full name, of course, is the Rosie the Riveter Trust. And I want to acknowledge that not everybody is able to access a Zoom program in the same way, and we're doing our best. And so the live transcript, there's going to be an attempt to make it enabled, but if you've been on Zoom past few years, you know it can be inaccurate. And so we're going to work hard for the recording to make sure that we have captioning, because there are some videos on tonight that we were not able to get the captioning to work right. So I am using more wording within the PowerPoint than maybe you would normally see on a PowerPoint, just to make sure we have more accessibility that way. And then for the audio description for non-sighted people, it's not available through this technology. So I will attempt to do a brief description of the photos when they go by. Why did I agree to do this talk? So I put a picture here of me back in 1987 with badly needing a haircut there. Because when Lisa Foote first approached me, hey, can you speak in June? You know, the assumption is, oh, it's going to be about World War II LGBTQ experience. And my immediate thought is, you know, I'm not a historian. I'm a park ranger. I get things done, you know, and I do research, I do read, but I didn't feel at all qualified to speak for 45 minutes on World War II history, specifically LGBTQ. But then this thought popped in my head of what if I spoke about my own experience and what it was like as a lesbian park ranger, and then what it was like to get to work on what we think is the first official LGBTQ exhibit, possibly in the Park Service. So that was pretty amazing. And so when I thought about that, and Lisa seemed excited about that, I thought, you know, this is something that I can make work then. And looking back at my 1987-year-old self, you know, I did remember how there were some hard times, but also some amazing times. And so I came up, she of course asked for the title right away. And in my head, I just suddenly thought about, you know, I survived and ultimately thrived. And I'm so grateful that I did not give up, because it gets better. And I think, you know, our youth especially don't hear that enough. And it's just hard when you're struggling and your self-esteem is lower, and you need to hear that perspective. And I can definitely say that the hard times made it worth it. I learned so much, and I'm stronger as a result. And so the pictures on the screen I'm sharing are from the summer of '92, where I got to hike in the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias, where I worked as an interpreter with, at that time, our oldest park ranger, Carl Sharsmith, the famous Tuolumne Carl Sharsmith. And I think he's over 60 years as a park ranger, and he's about 90 in that photo. To literally a couple weeks ago when we did the photo shoot for the Pride Parade, June 2022, with another obvious icon, 100-year-old park ranger Betty Reed Soskin, who I had the honor of serving with pretty much the whole time I was at Rosie. She was involved. And, you know, to speak about the surviving part, it is so crucial. You know, I can't say I experienced any like big traumas when I was in the Park Service, and yet there were definitely some difficult times. I do want to acknowledge, you know, as a white person, I could hide my identity if I chose to, and I want to acknowledge that my colleagues of color don't have that option, and they experienced real overt racism and pretty terrible things in the history of the Park Service. And the Park Service is trying to diversify and get better, but I definitely want to acknowledge that. And again, thinking about the youth and thinking about myself, and you know, there were some dark times in my life, and I saw this by the Trevor Project, which does a lot of youth outreach, that LGBTQ youth are not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, but they're placed rather at higher risk because of how they are mistreated and stigmatized in society. And of course, we're still reeling from, you know, being labeled an illness. Homosexuality was labeled an illness up until 1974 by the American Psychiatric Association. And so I also heard this said about, it's in our DNA, we are hardwired to connect. And I immediately found a photo of, like, from the 6 best years of my life, really, was on the restoration crew in Yosemite. And here's a photo where some of the front row there, linked arms, there's Sue Frisky, Sean Egan, Mark Butler. And that feeling of connection can be so, so important. And that's what, you know, when you're feeling like you're different, or you're feeling like you can't share yourself, you know, that's what can be so harmful. And I actually, having my master's in psychology, did a little Google research and thought, DNA, that's interesting. Are there any studies? And immediately something came up about the neuroscience of actually that we are wired to connect. And this is a Scientific American article that basically, when we experience social pain, you know, a snub, a cruel word, the feeling is as real as physical pain. And that finding is amongst studies in the new book, Social. It says, scientist Matthew Lieberman, that our need to connect is as fundamental as our need for food and water. Across many studies of mammals, from the smallest rodents all the way to us humans, the data suggests that we are profoundly shaped by our social environment, and we suffer greatly when our social bonds are threatened or severed. And so, to get to the thriving part, just getting the chance to work in nature and being in nature was huge for me. And women's music was also huge in my life. And the two would come together when I'd be out, even on an NPS project, singing around the campfire. There were a lot of my colleagues who were into music. So I do want to have start this program with showing some crews I was on. This is the restoration staff in Yosemite Valley. This was just a really fun project we worked on in the Lower River Campground. There was this enormous stump, and it was in the way of our restoration work. And our boss, Louise Johnson, got the trail crew to basically dynamite that stump out of the way. And you see the crew on the left with the result of the dynamited stump. It's a little blurry, I apologize. But on the right, I'm in my hard hat that says women working. And you can see Yosemite Falls in the background. It was very cold that day. I'm standing in the snow, but at least I had a beautiful view for the 4 or 5 hours I was the trail guard. It was an incredible feeling of teamwork. And then another project we worked on, this is Devil's Elbow, just before you reach El Capitan. And what you're seeing is this rock with this very eroded bank, because we used to have it as a picnic area until we realized that we needed to direct people to areas where there was sandbanks and things that could take that much impact. And so just after a few years of fencing it off, and we actually used an excavator to reshape the bank and plant willow and grasses, you can see in the picture below how the same rock is there and it has recovered. And now today, you don't even recognize it. As you drive by, there's so many trees and everything's overgrown, you can't even see Devil's Elbow anymore. So we're going to start off with the first video. It's by Melanie Demore, because she is just an amazing force of nature. And as I said, there's a picture of us now just from last Sunday, Grand Marshal, San Francisco Pride. So glad she's being honored. And she sings songs that really help heal people. And just she's just an incredible human being. So Lisa's going to start the video of our first song.
I'm gonna lift you up higher and higher. I'm gonna lift you up and walk by your side. I'm gonna lift you up higher and higher. I'm gonna lift you up and walk by your side. Don't worry, don't you fret, I'm right here with you. So I'm gonna lift you up.
So when I was growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I pretty much knew I was different from the time I could remember. Definitely, I kind of thought I was a boy, was definitely a tomboy, but I definitely knew I was different. There's a picture showing my dad and I. He took me hiking and on my very first 2 backpack trips before my parents got divorced, which definitely, I think, helped me fall in love with the outdoors. I didn't really know that it could be a career, but I just wanted to throw that in there because the other amazing thing is I grew up a half an hour away from San Francisco, and I do not recall meeting another out person that I knew was gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender until I got to college. I went to college at UC Davis, and that's shocking to think about now. But again, I was born in 1966. Pre-Ellen, pre the internet. I actually went to the library when I was in high school when I started to realize, oh, there's a label for this thing I am. And, managed when I was 16, 17 to pick out a few books from the library and hid them in my bed because I didn't tell anybody. And it was very painful and very hard. So get to the next slide. So when I came to Yosemite, I had spent just a couple years at UC Davis. I had actually been a Girl Scout camp counselor, and there is a funny story I just need to share about that. Is that when we were training, I ended up at Deer Lake, which is in the Sierra Nevada, but we trained at Bothine in Marin County. And I'll never forget this because we were all spread out, and the woman gets up there and says, "Thou shalt be no giving of massages in a tent with another woman." And I was kind of like startled. I'm like, what does this mean? Then the next thing she says is, "Thou shalt be no playing of women's music at camp." Now we all know now that women's music is a euphemism for lesbian music. Didn't know that then, and I just turned to the biggest butch sitting next to me and I said, "What's women's music?" Basically, she gave me my first mixtape and became my first partner later that summer. So that's how I found out about women's music. So when I came to Yosemite the next year later, having just wanted to take time off school, I was still pretty raw. I was still not really out. It was challenging because I felt like I couldn't really share who I was. There was a few people I trusted. Then I went off to New Zealand for 4 years and finally came back actually I needed to have a job. So thank God the way the Park Service was at that time, you could apply in January or June for a season. And I got back in and got a job in Wawona as an interpreter. And so the photo on the left is with the grizzly giant and doing an interpretive program. And the photo on the right is also kind of a funny story that once a week we would work in the Pioneer History Center. And you see me dressed as a male ranger. And so my story was, because I wasn't out really, was that the cabin was actually relocated from Crane Flat at the northern end of the park to the southern end where Wawona is. And my story was that I was the wife of a park ranger who'd gone off on patrol and I didn't feel comfortable. So therefore I dressed as a male ranger, But what happened is a lot of the tourists would come through. That was too complicated to explain to them. And so in the end, I could just pretend I was a male ranger, which I really loved. So I was dressing in drag in Yosemite. And this next story really highlights the importance of allies. So it was about 1994 when my friend Mary Beth Shenton, who I don't know if she was able to join us or not, was the only really other out person I knew in the park at that time. I was starting to come out more. And we had heard that in San Francisco, the folks down there had actually founded the GALA, as Sarah talked about, the Gay and Lesbian Association of the National Park Service. And we just thought that was incredible. And so we thought we would try to form GALA NPS, Yosemite. So I don't remember all that happened, but we did put out a call for people to come to this picnic area. And I have gotten in touch with two amazing allies, and I know one at least is here with us tonight, and we're going to see a video from him as he describes what happened.
Hi, I'm Calvin. I've been with the National Park Service for over 40 years. Back in the mid-90s, I returned to Yosemite as a permanent employee. In 1994 or thereabouts, Yosemite held its first Gay and Lesbian Alliance meeting. In support of our friends and co-workers, myself and Mary went over to the old superintendent's house picnic area and to help set up. When we got there, we found these horrendous brochures on every table. As we were starting to clear it up, Elizabeth came by and she wanted to see one. It was not something we want to share with each other. And they were originally placed there by co-workers. We've come a long way. Rangers in uniform are allowed to join in gay pride parades. That's something to be proud of. But times are changing again. Times are tough. We need to hang together and support each other. My background as an Asian American, I've had overt and underhanded discrimination sent my way. And don't let that divide us. Let's keep on working and make it better for ourselves and the next generation too. Thanks.
Thank you, Calvin. I'm going to start screen sharing again here. Calvin Liu, as he said, worked for the NPS over 40 years. He's a native of San Francisco and is here with us tonight from the Grand Canyon as their media and IT specialist. And he has instructed many hundreds of NPS employees in basic training course called Fundamentals. So I'm so glad that he can deliver his message that way to this new generation of park people. And the brochures he was referring to, I believe the next video Mary will talk about, but it was, they arrived there first. And I'm really grateful for that because they were, just like horrible imagery on the brochures. And at first they were trying to hide it from me, which is so sweet. But I just insisted on looking. And I realized later that they were such allies because they got there early for one thing, maybe to help set up or whatever. And if they hadn't been there picking them up, if I had gotten there early and found them first, it would have been much more traumatizing. And the other interesting thing about the whole thing is I did feel a little fear, but I mostly felt like embarrassment and shame, like I'd been exposed. And when I heard them talk about the horror of the brochures and the horrifying, it was like kind of a shock. Like I needed my allies to help me with that because I just wanted to hide and I felt the shame of it and not so much the horror part and so it's really interesting. And that's why, again, our allies are so important. So I'm going to go to the next screen and not sure if Mary Klein is able to join us because she's in Pennsylvania. It's quite late there, but she is a retired park ranger who spent 20 of her 34 years of service in Yosemite. Her career spanned both coasts and ranged from interpretation, law enforcement, mediation, and EO to being a division chief. She is currently a master gardener. So go ahead and start her video.
Hi. By now you've heard about the first open GALA meeting in Yosemite Valley and about the people who put out the Sodom and Gomorrah pamphlets that were so horrifying and full of hatred, and how much we've done since then, and hopefully about becoming allies and friends who don't stand up for things like that and who help and are willing to support people when their identities are challenged. And if you're thinking about the National Park Service, we are a good organization, we are family, and I think you'll like working for us. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Mary, and I'm going to share screen again here. So I only want to talk about one other incident because really I had so many amazing experiences too and such amazing support. But it does highlight, that managers and what organizations do can really impact your employees. So the pictures that are showing on the screen, the upper one is me getting to start a fire under prescribed conditions. When I got to do a 4-month detail with prescribed fire, it was definitely one of the best times of my life. I really enjoyed being a part of bringing back what is an important resource in the Sierra Nevada, and that is the low burning ground fires to try to keep the vegetation clear so we don't end up in these massive fire situations. And then the bottom right photo is me wearing this big backpack, which was a GPS system at the time. Now, of course, we have them in our phones. But I had to get on a helicopter and fly the fire line and map the fire line. And I loved flying in the helicopter. The few times, I was able to do it, was always a great experience. However, that one, I admit, was a little challenging because we flew low and we were flying, and I had to try hard to not lose it in the helicopter. I didn't, because the whole park would have been talking about it, but thank God I survived that one. But it was interesting. This manager was actually well-meaning and was really interested in getting more women in fire. The cutoff age was 35, and I think I was about 33, 34, and I've been doing more of the restoration side of fire and on some big fires, but really more the restoration after the fire. And so he was trying to recruit me a little bit. And when I was hesitating, saying, I am not young anymore, and my body, I could feel it when I wake up in the tent in the morning. Then all of a sudden he kind of changed his tune, and he looks at me and he said, well, yeah, you know what? You really are probably better off in San Francisco with your own kind. And I just remember being really shocked. I didn't know what to say. I just kind of said, oh, okay, and we kept on doing whatever we were doing. But I never forgot that, and how it just really, in some ways, it made me mad and want to prove myself more to stay in the mountains. But, I feel like he definitely could have been more thoughtful and skillful in that, in trying to coach me, because it was coming from, in his mind, a well-meaning place. I obviously want to talk about how it was hard, in a sense, for me, and it still is hard, but it was way harder for people, in the history of LGBTQ, the civil rights struggle. I mean, people were, murdered. In the worst case, it was illegal. People were disowned and put in psychiatric institutions. Before 1974, it was very easy. In this documentary, I highly recommend Before Stonewall and After Stonewall, these two documentaries. This woman just says, I was walking down the street, and they picked me up and stuck me in the hospital because her family had reported her. I mean, that's pretty scary to think about these days. There's another groundbreaking work coming out under fire that was done, and we relied on that for some of the research for the programs we put on. So I just want to highlight those two resources. There's been a lot more that's come out lately. And then in terms of our own park, I want to acknowledge Therese Ambrosi Smith, who I met early on after I'd started working, and she came to visit us when we were in the temporary visitor center. And we had some of the oral histories available. She got super excited when she learned about that. And she became an incredible ally, because she ended up, she volunteered with us, but then she wrote a novel and included lesbian characters. And I believe that is still available and sold by the Rosie Trust in the bookstore. And she was going to try to join us tonight. I'm not sure if she's able, but we have a little video from her. And her career has included an 8-year stint as a park planner, followed by 18 years as director of Parks and Recreation in Half Moon Bay, Cupertino, and Juneau, Alaska, seen in the picture sitting on her boat. And she is married, so she's an ally. But Teresa is a writer, drummer, and accidental nursery woman. She is the owner of Highway 92 Succulents in Half Moon Bay. And she still talks about how she held the coveted shift of our Rosie Friday volunteer at the visitor center. So we're going to go ahead and hear a short video from her.
I first became acquainted with Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Park when it was in a temporary office in Richmond, and Elizabeth was collecting oral histories. After the park was authorized, of course, the number one project was to interview as many people as possible before it was too late. And the material that they had, I was able to use for a writing project for the UCLA Writers Program, which eventually became a novel. It was a wonderful experience. I volunteered for the park and was in the first class of docents for when the visitor center opened. I learned so much. The creator of the interpretive plan was so, and Elizabeth, they were so comprehensive in their approach. They endeavored to include everybody's story, whether you were Mexican American, Native American, Japanese, somebody who migrated from the South, whatever. It was a wonderful story of mobilization, migration, integration. But as I learned more about the San Francisco Bay Area during the war, the more apparent it became to me that there was a big hole in the tapestry. Treasure Island was the place where sailors were sent to receive their dishonorable discharges if they were found to be gay and serving. If they were outed, they were brought there. And the impact of a dishonorable discharge is hard to imagine now, but back then when everyone served, it was a red flag to an employer. It meant you didn't receive VA benefits. It meant that you couldn't go to school on the GI Bill. And I think for a lot of people, it meant that you really couldn't go home. You couldn't go home and say what happened. And so San Francisco became its own community with its own businesses and its own opportunities. So to not have that part of the story told in the San Francisco Bay Area seemed really unfortunate.
Thanks to Therese. I'm going to share screen again here. Because one of the main things she did was when she realized that there was this hole, and I was aware of it, as she and I have talked about, and I talked about with Donna Graves, I didn't want to feel like I was pushing any sort of my own agenda. So there was no funding anyway, and everything we did, we tried to beg, borrow, and get different funding to do different projects. And but I didn't want to be perceived as pushing anything. But both, Donna Graves and Teresa mentioned several times, when were we going to work on an LGBTQ exhibit? And it was Therese who said, I'm going to donate the proceeds from my book. Oh, and by the way, my friend Warren, who I finally got to meet this year, is also going to donate a little. And that was really the impetus for me then to go to park management and say, hey, this is real. We have a little bit of funding. The Rosie Trust with Marshall Mather Thrift agreed to help. Can we do something? And Tom Leatherman, our superintendent, was incredibly supportive. And so we get the next slide. So we basically started by recognizing we needed stories. And we launched the, this is an embarrassing thing on my part. I started it by saying to Donna, well, we need to launch a lesbian gay stories project, because back then that's what really, if you even said the name lesbian. And then she immediately said, well, you can't do that. Obviously we have to do LGBT. And I literally said to her, I remember saying this, something about, well, it was so long ago, I don't think anybody was using the words transgender, coming out back then. So we sent the poster out and we contacted some of our partners, including the UC Berkeley Oral History Center, who we do have with us tonight, David Dunham, who will be on at the end to update us. But guess what the very first story we got, and it was from UC Berkeley, was a trans man. So, I had to learn a lot. And so pleased to meet Jeffrey Dykman. And I just love his name. His name is literally, his real name was, and I just found out today, he passed away. I was trying to contact him to see if he wanted to come on, because he came to some of our events, and I'm still reeling that I didn't realize it. He had passed away, like all of our World War II generation. But anyway, Dyke Man. That is literally his real name, Dyke Man. And he lived as a dyke, as a lesbian, out lesbian for a long time. Now the pictures are an old faded newspaper, and on the very left, that is Jeffrey when she was in high school. And at that time, she was in the Farm Cadet Victory Corps. And as you can see on the right, there's no way anybody would suspect that Jeffrey was once Mildred. So, and also he's retired professor emeritus of sociology and just delightful to talk to, a bit crusty, but an amazing, amazing man. So when we were doing the Stories Project, I, was busy with the visitor center. So it was sort of a labor of love. I tried to reach out to my friends and colleagues, and I was invited to La Peña Cultural Center, March 16th of 2014, for the Preserving Our Bay Area Lesbian Legacy. And I went in uniform and made the announcement that we were collecting stories, and found out of all the amazing work for the lesbian archives that we tried to do in the East Bay. We did our first stories event in Walnut Creek, California, Saklan Indian site, here in Rossmore, which has 11,000 seniors. So we figured it would be a great place to start, and we actually had an amazing event. And you can see I am on my arms. I'm in the middle in full uniform, dress uniform, and I have a straight ally, Rosie Agnes Moore, on my right side, and then on the left is Beth Hickok, who I'm going to mention, and you can see Donna Graves and Kathleen Epperson here in Rossmore, and peeking out of the back is Marcia Mather Thrift and a wonderful volunteer, Miriam, and then Veronica over my left shoulder, and then Carol Morton, a friend of mine who's passed away, and then finally Therese. So we were highlighted in our local newspaper for that event. And Veronica got involved as the curator of Rosie the Riveter, and was an amazing help as we started to collect various things. And so she is a former museum curator, and she's originally from Tulare County. She now lives in Evanston, Illinois, with her wife, Terry, and 2 rescue pit bulls named Lucy and Arya. She currently works as an analyst at McMaster Car Supply Company. And Veronica started as an intern at Rosie the Riveter while she was getting her master's in museum studies, and then became a permanent curator. And the picture shows her at that Rossmore event accepting an item for a collection. And we're going to see a video.
Hi, I'm Veronica Rodriguez, and I'm a former curator at Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, and I'm a queer woman. I actually got to work with Elizabeth for about 5 or 6 years at Rosie. And in those early years, we were actively collecting stories, mementos, photos for the Park Service collection, and also developing exhibits and public programming built around those incredible stories. I got to meet so many of the actual Rosies who came to the park for visits, who came to the festivals, who called in, and it was just such an incredibly collaborative environment, and got to work with so many dedicated public servants like Elizabeth. It was a really exciting time to be part of something that was building and growing, and I'm just so honored that I got to be a part of something that is going to continue to grow and will continue to impact and share these incredible stories of what these women and all these different people from all these different backgrounds came together and experienced during the war. It was also at this time in my life that I actually first came out, and that was not such an easy road to go down initially. There was some resistance and pushback from some family members who took quite a while to come around to acceptance. But during that time, I was also able to come to work every day and know that I was in a safe and welcoming environment. Everyone in the Park Service took my coming out as just a natural thing. And I could come to work at Rosie and feel good about the work that I was doing, and feel like I could be my whole self with people who valued me as a coworker and just as a person. And so I just have so many incredible memories and took so many lessons from that time. But one that I want to share in particular was there is a quote as you walk into the visitor center that is from one of the Rosies who actually volunteered at the park. And this is something that has stayed with me all these years. And that quote is, "I didn't do anything great specifically, but I was a part of something great." That's what one of the Rosies said about her experience working during World War II in the shipyards. And that's how I see my time at Rosie and my time working with the Park Service. And that's how I still see my role in our community today. Individually, we often feel sort of powerless or small, but collectively, our stories and our voices and our actions become so powerful. And together we can be part of something great.
That was so beautifully said, Veronica. So I'm going to share screen again here. And I have used that quote too. And so what I did is I put a couple photos of, these were actually some of my last days at Rosie in 2019. And you can see the quote on the wall by Marion Suzay. And Marion Suzay is in the photo on the right with our Rosie Friday crew. She's Agnes Moore is on the very left, and then to the right of her, that is Marion Suzay. And then we have Karen Fong and myself doing the Rangers Pointing at Things, which is a whole Facebook page, which is hilarious if you want to go check that out. But like Veronica said, that's completely the way I feel. I mean, this park is many hands make a miracle. I just feel like so honored to be a part of this collective history. And really, that's what our park represents, is the whole we can do it attitude, is when we pull together and work together and include everybody's voices, nothing can stop us. And our famous, Betty Reed Soskin so eloquently points out that, our next big challenge facing the world, is the climate change crisis and what's happening to our earth. And yet, if we pull together, we can do it. And so there's just so much importance from the homefront history that we can pull on. So after we started to collect stories, we of course decided to do an event at our visitor center, and that was June 14th, 2014. And it was the last time the 3 people we ended up discovering that were living were together and alive. And so on the left side, we see Beth Hickok, her caretaker Hannah, Sulwyn Jones, who was in the military, Donna Graves, myself, Jeffrey Dykman, and a famous lesbian photographer, Kathy Cade. And we got some great press. So this was the Bay Area paper. And then early on, it was recognized that what we were doing here at Rosie was cutting edge, like a lot of stuff at Rosie. And I was actually interviewed for a textbook on April 29th, 2014. And I had never seen the actual textbook. So I decided to order it, and it came a few days ago. And there you can see my name, that I was interviewed for an hour. When I actually opened up the book, we're just mentioned in a couple places very briefly, but still we can say, Rosie the Riveter again, made it, history, you could say, by being, I'm going to say possibly the first national park that had an official exhibit. And we hadn't even had the exhibit yet. This was still the process. And that's basically what the book implies, is she said that we were in the process of gathering stories to create the exhibit. We actually were in Newsweek. There was the highlighted quote, back then you could be arrested for wearing clothing of the opposite gender. We were highlighted in the magazine of the National Parks Conservation Association that summer for Untold Stories. We owe it to the public to tell these stories, to tell this history. This is a picture of Sulwyn Jones. As I mentioned, he was in the military, and we got to hear about his experience and also what it was like coming home. So that's how we tied it in, that he actually, for him, it was the coming home part that he ended up helping a friend who was dishonorably discharged, and just his struggles coming home was harder than being in the military for himself. And then Beth Hickok, it was so incredible to get to meet her. She turned out to be, I jokingly called her the triple threat. She actually was a civilian teacher during World War II. Then she became an actual Rosie the Riveter, working in an airplane factory in Southern California. And then she went to Washington and joined the Waves and volunteered for the government. You see her in uniform there. So it was so amazing to meet her. And she wrote a novel, an autobiographical novel about the time. So that was just amazing. She didn't get to see her exhibit opening, unfortunately, but she did get to participate in some of the events. Donna Graves was interviewed by the New York Times, August 21st, 2016. You can see our visitor center prominently displayed in the New York Times. And because we had that little bit of funding, and it was not very much, when I called Donna, I said to her, we just don't have, maybe someday we can work on a grant, but we just have a very small amount to start this hopefully traveling exhibit. Is there any way that you could, help us a little bit? Because she had told me she was already working on the San Francisco historic project. And so she agreed. And so she went to the GLBT Historical Society already, was working on the historic context statement for San Francisco, and discovered amazing artifacts and really fun things we were able to include in the exhibit, including like the Black Cat Cafe. Just love that picture. We discovered Gladys Bentley, who in the 20s, 30s was dressing in drag and just proudly out. I just love this picture of just friends at the Claremont Hotel in Berkeley in 1945. And another person I want to acknowledge is graphic designers and how they make us look good. So here is an example of what I would send to a graphic designer. On the left is very bare bones, just kind of some ideas. And on the right, you can see the beautiful traveling exhibit that the pull-ups, we call them, that was made. And so here's the press release from the event and the exhibit opening. And here's actually cutting the ribbon. And I'd like everybody to hear from Luther Bailey, who's been the visual information specialist for 13 years at our 4 East Bay parks. It's going to be an audio clip with some pictures of the opening. As an undergraduate, he worked with Lake Mead, but he did get his BS from the Art Institute in San Francisco. He's part of regional and national teams providing multimedia, web, and communication support for the NPS. He grew up in a very rural part of Oklahoma, as he'll talk about, and he's currently married to his partner of 16 years.
My name is Luther, and I'm a park ranger and visual information specialist for the National Park Service. My job is to help parks tell stories through exhibits and multimedia content. I have to admit that when this project came across my desk in 2016, I felt the familiar and uncomfortable tinge of what will people think if we talk about gay people. As a proud gay man, it's never comfortable having to admit this fear that lies just under the surface. Growing up in a conservative Oklahoma, I spent my entire childhood feeling afraid and unsure of how to become who I am as a human being and ways to safely live my life in a free and open manner. I remember putting on that uniform and flat hat for the first time and having such a sense of pride that was indescribable. I, as a gay man, had finally crossed that barrier into a place where I felt that only straight men and women had been represented. I was still unaware of the many brothers and sisters that I had throughout this organization that also represented our LGBTQ family. Over time, I came to realize that people like Ranger Elizabeth Tucker were out there and how important it was for her and others to start to really tell these stories of people throughout our parks and many of the hidden histories that showed that we, as a group, not only existed, but carried many burdens, as well as dealt with sometimes unimaginable struggles. These stories needed to be told regardless of and because of my own discomfort. I was an example of a gay man who, even though I live in one of the world's greatest and open cities for LGBTQ people, I needed to continue my journey of acceptance and finally have a higher level of comfort with telling these stories. Don't get me wrong, I'm in no way ashamed of who I am. I accepted myself many years ago, but that acceptance doesn't change the world on its own. There are still wounds that exist at a subconscious level, and I hope that with this kind of representation in the Park Service, we can help to prevent those wounds in the hearts and minds of the young who are growing up in this challenging world. I wish that I could say that nowadays there's even no discrimination in this amazing organization that I call home, but that wouldn't be accurate since the NPS represents people from all walks of life. At 50 years of age, I have a responsibility to reach out to as many people as I can to show that we are here and we are a part of the many stories and the history that wove together the fabric of our country. I'm heartened to see that the national park sites from around the nation are asking to borrow this small but very meaningful exhibit in order to continue the representation of an often overlooked and underappreciated people.
I want to thank Luther for his incredible hard work. We had to pull some stuff together very last minute to get that going, and just very much appreciate him. And a shout out to Kelly English, who was in there. She was my direct supervisor, who was incredibly supportive during this whole project. And at the last minute, I threw this at him. I said, these 3 traveling pull-ups that are available in the visitor center right now are kind of small. can we broaden the exhibit a little? And so he actually worked with me, and we created these 2 panels that you saw, one for Beth Hickok and one for Jeffrey Dykeman, and it really filled out that corner in the bottom of the visitor center where we put traveling exhibits. I'm aware we're getting time-wise a little low, so I'm going to skip ahead a little more quickly. Is that in 2016, the LGBTQ theme study came out for the National Park Service, which was incredibly heartening to see. That's how you end up getting parks. And basically, I want to talk about the evolution of the Park Service a little bit through the parades. That back in 1994, as Sarah mentioned, we were not allowed to march in uniform. So there we are. We were at the back of the parade in these shirts. People really didn't know who we were. It was 5 hours into the parade. People were barely clapping, except when they saw maybe the hat. I do want to point out the picture on the right says, even in Yosemite, we are everywhere. That was the entire contingent that had come down from Yosemite, pretty much the entire GALA NPS Yosemite group. Marie Den, who was in my Girl Scout troop, Mary Beth Shenton, and myself. And here is the ranger hat. That was the only thing that we had that kind of distinguished us. And to my right is Naomi Torres, who is a superintendent right now in the National Park Service. I was able to talk to her on the phone today. She couldn't join us tonight. She sent her apologies. But she did say, wow, we were a couple of baby dykes back then. So anyway, that's a fun picture for me to look at. And then skip ahead to 2016, 100 years of the National Park Service. And I cannot tell you the healing that I felt marching in that parade, where we had upper management of the National Park Service with us. We had a lot of straight allies. In fact, the very few of us were actually LGBTQ. It was more straight allies that were with us, this whole picture almost. And it was this incredible feeling of support. And Donna Graves marched with us. So on the right is Chris Leonard, who was the regional director at the time, actually an out lesbian. And then I made a sign for Donna Graves as a kind of a joke, play on words on PFLAG, parents and friends of lesbian and gays. I gave her PH flag, public historian, friend of lesbians and gays. And there's Martha Lee, our incredible deputy regional director and also former superintendent, the first one of the 4 parks in our area, and the first Rosie, 4-park superintendent, just incredible ally. And here's some fun pictures that I'm in uniform getting to take pictures with very colorful San Franciscans. And just my friend Bertha, and just incredible support of our allies. And here is the amazing gift we all got in 2016 is a gay national park. I had literally told people, oh, it's going to take 20 years. It's not going to happen. I was very pessimistic. And then because of the theme study and because the time was right, President Obama signing it, we have Stonewall National Historic Site in New York. And now I want to introduce the last video, talking video, is Donna Graves, who's an independent historian urban planner based in Berkeley. She's develops interdisciplinary public history projects that emphasize social equity and sense of place. Graves serves as project director for the Rosie the Riveter Memorial and was instrumental in establishing and developing the park. She co-authored with Shane Watson a citywide study of LGBTQ historic places in San Francisco and contributed a chapter to the NPS's LGBTQ national theme study that I mentioned before. Graves is currently co-leading a project, History and Hope, interpreting the roots of our climate crisis, and she holds an MA in urban planning from UCLA and an MA in American civilization from Brown University, and she has been such a friend to Rosie over the years, pushed us in directions that we needed to go, and we're so grateful for her. And she actually did this video from Scotland.
Greetings from Glasgow, Scotland. I'm Donna Graves. I'm an independent public historian, and I've been involved with Rosie the Riveter National Park since it was being conceptualized. I'm so happy to be able to join you virtually to congratulate Elizabeth Tucker and the park and celebrate Pride Month with you all. Walking in the 2016 Pride Parade in San Francisco with Elizabeth and the NPS contingent was such an incredible day and a wonderful way to cap off the work that we've done together on the Homefront Queer Histories exhibit that we worked on. Elizabeth asked me as a historian what I thought might be next steps for Rosie the Riveter and the Park Service at large in LGBTQ history. For Rosie, we really had to rely on documentation from San Francisco to pull that exhibit together. That's where the largest queer community was during World War II and where most of the historians have focused. But it's clear that there was a small, probably not very visible, but active community of lesbian and gay and bisexual and even transgender individuals during World War II. And it would be wonderful if there were historians, younger historians, who could find some of those places and stories to weave into the Rosie the Riveter interpretation. In terms of the Park Service as a whole, one of the things I think the Park Service is moving towards, and LGBTQ history is a really important place to do this, is looking at how our histories and our histories as individuals are not so siloed. The kinds of identity histories, it's only African American, only LGBTQ, only women, don't really fit our lives. And as I was working on the San Francisco City Historic Context Statement, one of the real amazing experiences was interviewing all of these activists from the 60s and 70s who were trying to change the world. And they weren't just trying to change the world in terms of LGBTQ experience and oppression, but all forms of culture and rights. And so I think the Park Service could be looking at places and stories that bring those struggles for a better world together. In the Bay Area, there are a couple that are really obvious. One is the Women's Building in San Francisco, which I think should be a National Historic Landmark and could be part of a queer national park in San Francisco. And another is the Tricone Building in Oakland, which was an organization that was founded in the 1980s by South Asian queer people about their identities, their multiple and complex identities, and being part of the larger LGBTQ movement as South Asians. So those are just a couple ideas of places that I think Park Service historians and other young historians might be pursuing. Anyway, thank you for letting me be involved in the event, and have a great time. Bye.
Again, just so appreciative for Donna and all the work she has done to make us look good. And we're almost to the point where we have live panelists. I know not everybody was able to join us tonight, but Mary Beth Shenton, who was my fellow GALA NPS person, I got in touch with her. She's at Point Reyes, is maybe going to join us. David Dunham's here from UC Berkeley and the Oral History Project. Calvin Liu is coming to us live from the Grand Canyon. Not sure if Mary Klein was able to get on, but we have Veronica and possibly Therese. But we do have one last little video here from my friend, Grand Marshal, San Francisco Pride Parade 2022 at a Force of Nature, Melanie DeMore.
From San Francisco Pride 2022, my name is Melanie DeMore, Grand Marshal for the community, here with ET Elizabeth Sumter, back to the home, Ranger America.
You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. And you gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love.
Thank you, Melanie. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you, or you wanted me to go ahead and introduce David?
I do. I want you to introduce people, but I do just want to sort of let you know, Elizabeth, that this is too rich. I'm incredibly riveted, and I'm sure everyone else is. And please go ahead and take your time. And if it's okay with the audience, we are going to extend this program to 7:30 as a stopping time, because this is rich. And I also want everyone to know that it is being recorded and it will be up on our YouTube channel by Tuesday, Lisa says. So this is something to really share. And please continue, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and apologies for running over, but as you said, I was trying, and it's just, there is so much here, and Rosie just does that. I mean, it's such a collective park. It's so nuanced. There's so many incredible stories that's why we have to have two films at the visitor center. We couldn't just tell the local story. We also had to tell the national story. And I want to introduce David Dunham, who has been a part of the UC Berkeley faculty campus for a long time through the Oral History Center. And I've almost from the beginning that I've been involved in, and an important part of our park. We were probably one of the first parks in our legislation for our park. It says, "Thou shalt collect oral histories." So that's how important it is. So I'm hoping David can update us on just brief history and then what's the latest thing for the Oral History Project.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. This is a tough acts to follow here, and I'm not pre-recorded, but I'll do my best here. I'm just so honored that you invited me tonight, Elizabeth, to share a little bit. And I'm so touched to hear some of your stories, Calvin's, Veronica's, Luther's, and others, challenging but inspiring stories. As an oral historian, my immediate reaction is that all of you should have full oral histories done about your extraordinary life journeys with the National Park Service and beyond. A little bit, I started at the Oral History Center in 2002, a year before Elizabeth joined Rosie. And as she mentioned earlier, she's somebody who got things done, and I think that's a serious understatement. For years, I thought Elizabeth was the Rosie the Riveter Park. Even as the park grew in every way, she just seemed like the heart and soul of it, all the way up to her retirement. Every event, I just felt like everything kind of went through Elizabeth. So just an extraordinary individual that I'm proud to have had as a colleague, I feel like, in my work, while working at UC Berkeley, but collaborating with the Park Service so much. I worked on and off on the Rosie project, did a little interviewing. And then in 2010, I really became the project manager when we got a big wave of funding to really go from, we'd done about 100 interviews a couple years at a time. And then we got to really double that and ultimately did over 250 interviews for the project. But when I became project manager, we really wanted to look at, and in collaboration with the park, what were the gaps in the collection, in terms of race, geography, jobs, and LGBTQ stories. So I did an interview with the Bay Area Reporter, an LGBTQ newspaper in the same space in San Francisco, to try to recruit narrators back in 2011. And I'll just share a little link of that article here. And but that's where I met Jeffrey Dykman, was through that article. And there were a few other respondents that came forward, but most of them were very young. And that was always a challenge with people. If they were more or less, children during the home front years, it was hard to justify sometimes doing their interviews for this project. But, I always wanted to try to find ways to just still tell their stories. But Jeffrey was just, extraordinary. And, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, to just share his passing, that he passed last year. But was Mildred during the war years, worked in the Women's Land Army, along with, at that time, her sister, in upstate New York, but had an extraordinary life as a, civil rights leader, was actually advisor to Huey P. Newton at Merritt College, and what would become the Black Panther Party, and then so much, and then at 65, to make the decision to transition to a man. And that story, that was I did 2-hour interviews with Jeffrey, and I really had hoped to do a third one, really talking about that experience, and just. But unfortunately, we didn't get there. But I'm so glad that you did the exhibit, and that there were other stories and interviews done. I remember Jeffrey talking about the Newsweek reporter, and Elizabeth mentioned Jeffrey could be kind of cagey. He was definitely skeptical of the reporter, and so me at first too. But we really developed a bond and a friendship, and we went to a movie together later. Anyway, I'm going to share also the link here to the oral history with Jeffrey. And then I'm just going to share one more link, which is kind of our main oral history project site, which has over 250 oral history transcripts. And we are in the process now that we've exhausted kind of the interviews that we can do for the most part with World War II home front folks. And I'll say also, 2011, 2014, we of course wish we'd started sooner trying to collect LGBTQ and other stories. There are many stories out there, and even though it might have been harder for folks to come forward, from that generation, I think we could have got at that. There's still so many interesting aspects in terms of the Rosie story and women working in traditional roles and, thoughts, things about gender and really transformational things and exciting stuff. And a lot of challenges along the way too, for women with discrimination and certainly with race and all. But we hope that these oral histories, touch on that. We're trying to make them more and more accessible. Our website right now is a little fractured because the library just relaunched it. But in the fall, I'll hopefully be doing a presentation talking about how we have the oral history transcripts synced to the videos and how you can access and utilize this collection. And we're expanding upon it too with some of the donated oral histories that the National Park Service has. So if you have any questions about oral history, let me know. Is there anything else you wanted me to touch on, Elizabeth?
No, but you just brought a couple things up. These oral histories are so important to everybody. And of course, the wall that Veronica talked about and I showed the picture of, I'm pretty sure that was from Marion Souzet's oral history. And we all have this technology. It is better than the Apollo 11 computer. And if someone is in your life and you want to capture something, do it. Don't wait, because I started realizing that towards the end of the visitor center, when some Rosie would come in or somebody telling some incredible story, I would, that's one way at least of getting something. So, but thank you all, because yours, is professionally done. The transcript is checked, and and we can all access that, and we use it for exhibits, and it's just been a wonderful resource and wonderful partnership for the park. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to echo that sentiment, I mean, we do oral history workshops. We invite people to come to that, but we talk about all the kind of equipment and whatever we use. But at the end of the day, I always say, just go for it. Don't be intimidated by what we talk about or the professionalism. Interview folks, because if you don't, in many cases, who will? And we want those stories. And also be willing to be interviewed, because a lot of people, have a hard time being convinced that their story is worthwhile. But I can tell you, everybody who has spoken tonight has an invaluable story, and I would love to know more about your experiences.
Well, thank you.
Thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And I want to make sure we have time for questions, but really quick, does either Veronica or Calvin want to add anything at this time? You have to unmute yourself if you do.
It's an honor to be here, and it's great stuff that you're putting together, and let's work hard to make it better and more available.
Well, Calvin, again, what you did has stuck with me for ever since it happened, and I just I've always thought of you and Mary in just this huge friendship way, even though we were out of touch. So it's so sweet that you could come on tonight, and I know Mary's with us by phone, so I don't understand how the technology works, but you can represent, and you both are just extraordinary allies. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, I'm a native San Franciscan, and I'm always proud wherever I've gone to say San Francisco is still home, and I'm more liberal than liberal. We are different, and we lead the way.
Hey, Veronica.
Hi. So I just wanted to say thank you, Elizabeth, so much for letting me be a part of this event and having a little bit of a say here. I just wanted to say it was truly amazing experience to work at Rosie. And I just also want to echo what David said about capturing stories of any person of any walk of life is so important. And that's certainly one of the main takeaways that I have from Rosie, is that everyone's story matters. And whether or not you think you have something important to say, you absolutely do, especially to someone else who may have an experience similar to yours. Everyone's story matters, and everyone's story collectively, it's so important. And I'm just extremely honored that I got to be a part of this project for the time that I was there.
Well, thank you for all your hard work. I mean, I just always admired your professionalism and just your grace and calmness, and it was a joy to work with you. And I hope to come to Chicago someday and visit you. So, and your wife, which is incredible. So anyway, thank you all for joining. Are there any questions or?
Really quickly, I just want to say I'm going to try to bring in Mary.
Oh, okay.
So give me just a moment. You guys can keep talking amongst yourselves, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Oh, Mary, all the way from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, it's dark here. Oh, thank you so much. I have trouble with my internet here and where I was earlier today, but I am so glad to have heard from about 9:07 on. Thank you so much. It was great to hear all the stories, and Elizabeth, it was memorable to us too, and so are you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mary. I hope you heard me complimenting you and Calvin, because just like it's stuck with me for my life. So thank you.
You guys, I just want to say what a pleasure this has been to just get to know all the different stories. And Elizabeth, you are an incredible storyteller, and I am just really, honestly, I know it's a funny word to use here, but I'm riveted. I was riveted. I cried. I laughed. What a beautiful presentation. And I just deeply thank you. I learned a lot. I also want to say we did get in the chat, Ellen Petchman said, when Elizabeth left Rosie, she started a fund in her honor. And I just want to let everyone know that as a way to, thank Elizabeth, we can always remember that there is a fund. This work will go on. It will build. And just sort of like Veronica said, and so many here tonight, that our stories are powerful and our stories connect. And I think that's what it's about, is it's about the connection and the past to the future to engagement. And I think that you've started and we're part of something very brilliant there at Rosie Park. And I, for one, feel extremely proud to now be a part of it. So on behalf of Rosie the Riveter Trust, my incredible team, I did say before, Lisa, you've gone above and beyond by curating this program tonight seamlessly, set new standards.
Thanks to Lisa. I called her at least 3 different times in a panic during the week, needing help with something, and she was just right there and right on. Lisa, thank you so much. And being at the parade, taking pictures too.
And I know people are asking for the link to donate to your fund. And I would say, please go to rosietheriveter.org to our donate page. And there's a way that you can just put in a message. And if you put in that message that it's for the Elizabeth Tucker Fund, that should work just fine.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to Ellen. And that money mostly is used for our Every Kid in a Park program. And it's so important and crucial. It's the 4th grade age we reach out to, and we actually partner with UC Berkeley. And we do like a 4-hour program, which includes some World War II history and then climate change walk along the Bay Trail. It's just this incredible program, and just so honored to be a part of that. And I mean, one of my, sort of favorite and also touching memories is twice this happened. A bus pulled up and a kid got off, and we're there right on the bay, and we're at the ocean. I mean, this kid lives a mile away, and the parents are working 3 jobs, hasn't had time to take, their child down to the beach or whatever, and the child is transfixed that they're at the ocean to them, and that fund makes that possible to get buses for these 4th graders. So yeah, we appreciate anything that anybody can contribute, and thanks to Ellen and all the volunteers who really, when I left and retired, created that. So.
Elizabeth, I can't help myself, but I do want to ask Lisa to speak about what was done during COVID when the 4th graders were not able to come to the park, and, we were not paying for the buses. We did something else pretty amazing. And I think especially David will appreciate hearing about it. Lisa?
Thanks for putting me on the spot. That's okay. But something that I've really been honored to be a part of, Catherine Daschle, who I'm not sure if she's still on. She was trying to join earlier. She was the former supervisory park ranger at our park, and she just recently retired. But she called me really quickly, kind of in a panic, a year and a half ago, saying, okay, I'm going to apply for this grant, and can you help? And I said, sure. And little did I know what I was getting into, and it's been such an amazing experience. But in the tradition of oral histories, and the kids couldn't come to the park, Karen Fong also helped with this. We created virtual tours of the visitor center, And then students also had an opportunity to interview and speak to Ben Tekeshita, who was a child or a teenager in the internment camps, Japanese American internment camps. And then it evolved into having students interview members in their community. It could be an elder in their own family. It could be somebody that they didn't know, but they documented these interviews and created this oral history for themselves. And it was just a great way to bring this tradition of sharing stories and that everybody has something to share. And most recently, I just want to say this, that there was a student who was interviewing his grandfather. He immigrated from Guatemala, and he seemed very stern at the beginning. And the student asked a very simple question: did you have any pets growing up? And he did, and just broke down into tears, bawling almost for a good 2 or 3 minutes about how his pet had passed. And I'm pretty sure that that was the first time he had ever been asked about that. And at first it took us a little by surprise, but you could tell he was very grateful. It was an amazing experience. And so it's been, last year was close to 100 students that I worked with. And this year also almost that amount. So editing their videos with them, asking them to look for pictures, and helping put that in. It's been a really wonderful experience.
Thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to close us out for the night?
Well, I just want to thank everybody who was able to join us live. And again, big thank you to the trust and the staff. And I know Lisa's and be working hard to get the recording up, because a lot of people had messaged me they weren't able to join live, but they're looking forward to the recording. So thank you all, the panelists for coming on live and videos. And thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, the trust. And just again, grateful to the National Park Service for its role in our country. We are so fortunate to have this organization really to preserve and pass on these stories. And we all need to push the organization just to get better. And it is getting better. So don't give up.
Come visit us, everyone. Come visit us. Thank you. And with that, goodbye and be well.